Hey there. So, I'm afraid I lied in a recent video. About a week or so ago, I made a video talking about GTA 6 because the trailer had just come out. And in that video, I said how I just have a hard time getting excited for games these days because of how many times I've been disappointed by recent releases where the hype is massive and then the game comes out and either it's nothing like it was promised to be or it just ends up being shit in general. And then, it's just really disappointing. And after that happening time and time again, it's just like I can't do it anymore. I didn't intend to lie. I guess I can't help myself. But lately I've been seeing some leaks for the upcoming Battlefield game. I mean, it's still super early in development, so it's probably not going to be out for another 2 or 3 years or something. But I've been seeing leaks for this new upcoming Battlefield game, and I find myself getting excited. I know I shouldn't because of all of the franchises. Battlefield has literally the worst track record. Their games always manage to launch in just the worst state imaginable. Battlefield 5 was apparently like borderline unplayable because the servers were bad when it launched. 2042 was just literally an unfinished game when it came out. Battlefield 4 had much the same problems that Battlefield 5 did, server issues, which is weird because, it's pretty much the same game every time it comes out. You would think that they would know what they need to do in order to make it work, but I guess they just never learn. There's also something to be said about the fact that for some reason Battlefield never learns from its own successes. It seems like every single time they make a new game, they completely just scrap all of the cool ideas that they had, come up with in the previous installment. So for 2042, for instance, they made a lot of cool improvements in Battlefield 5, like with the fortification system and the movement system where you could crouch run and you could fall on your back and explosions would push your character over and stuff like that. Some pretty cool things. And then they just left all of that out of the game when they made 2042. So it's just weird how they constantly have to reinvent the wheel. Not in a good way where the game is fresh every time, but in a way that's they're just not fully taking advantage of the fact that they've already figured out how to do these things and they should just leave them in the game. But I digress. I've been seeing leaks lately for the new Battlefield, and like I said, I just can't help but get a little bit excited as I see the things that are being leaked. And so I thought I would make a video about it. So that's what we're going to do. Now, this video is coming out around the time, apparently, DICE themselves have recently made an announcement about the next Battlefield, which I'm just going to be calling it Battlefield 6. I don't know if that's what it's going to be called, but for the rest of this video, that's just what I'm going to call it. So Battlefield 6 refers to whatever this next game that hasn't been released yet is going to be. It might not be called Battlefield 6, I don't know. But apparently they just made an announcement saying that, the weapons would... In Battlefield 6, the weapons are going to be available to all of the classes. So they're not going to do the classic class structure where recon gets sniper rifles and, assault gets assault rifles and stuff like that, And I think they might have also mentioned something about a lack of a server browser, although I'm not 100% sure. I haven't actually read the announcement that they made myself. I've just seen other people talk about it, so I don't know. This video wasn't necessarily spurred by that announcement, but it just kind of coincides with it because people are talking about it. And like I said, I've just been seeing leaked gameplay from the current play tests that they're doing. And I just felt like talking about it and figured that it would be a good time because of the discourse that's currently going on. I guess I'll touch quickly on those two things. In my opinion, I literally don't care. To be fair, I never really used the server browser, even when it was in the games that it was a part of. I just never did. I'm just a press one button, match make me kind of guy. That's all I care about. I would say the only real like argument to be made for there being a server browser in the modern games is that, when you rely on the game to find a match for you in the current landscape of competitive, first-person shooters, with the strict skill-based matchmaking that's becoming much more normal, that is a bit of a downside, I guess. If you were given the ability to pick your own server, you would kind of have control over the experience that you have. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. I don't necessarily care one way or the other. It's not like I want them to exclude the server browser. I just never used it, so it doesn't affect me at all. I just want to press one button, find a match for me, get me in the game as quickly as possible. That's all I care about. As long as the gameplay is fun and it finds a good match with good ping and good players, then, that's all I care about. As for the weapons not being locked to specific classes, again, I don't care. I never really liked the fact that only certain classes could use certain weapons. So that doesn't bother me really at all. I've seen a lot of people say that it, not only is this like a bastardization of what Battlefield has always been, but it's like, oh, it's going to reduce the team play or it's going to ruin the game flow because like the game is designed with that structure in mind, right? And I get it. All right. In an idealized world, yes, giving every class, every weapon does reduce the team play, because if a sniper can just go off on their own and they can have an ammo box, they can just stay there indefinitely, right? They don't have to rely on anyone else to get ammo or, whatever other combination of weapon and abilities you want to use as an example. The problem with that argument is that never in the history of the Battlefield franchise has anyone ever played it with like teamwork in mind. I think anybody that uses the argument that not having weapons locked to classes will reduce team play is thinking of Battlefield in a very like romanticized way. They are imagining a game that does not exist and has never existed. People don't play Battlefield that way. It would be great if they did. I've talked in previous videos about how much I wish people played Battlefield as more of a unit. And I've talked before about how I find it interesting that with like the Battle Royale games that have become really popular, people are willing to work closely with their squad because there's like a need to. You basically have to. And it's weird that Battlefield doesn't do that same thing. People don't play it the same way. I agree, it's a shame, but that's just the reality of the situation. Even when the classes had locked weapons, people didn't play as a team. Medics don't revive. The support people don't give you ammo, they don't play like that. They never have, and they probably never will, unless a game mode is released that heavily incentivizes squad play, which is something we'll get to later in this video, but, it is what it is. So for that reason, I really just don't care about the squad locked weapon or the class locked weapons. People don't play Battlefield that way. Everybody always goes off and does their own thing. I mean, unless you're playing with like a close group of friends, then like, sure, maybe, you guys are going to play together. And maybe once in a blue fucking moon, you might get a squad that's actually on the mic, actually communicating, actually trying to work together, but it is exceedingly rare. It is exceedingly rare. So you can't try to use the argument that like, oh, this is going to reduce the team play. It's like, no, nobody plays this way to begin with. So just drop it. All right. The best example of this, in my opinion, the best proof that nobody plays Battlefield with like teamwork in mind is with 2042. When 2042 released, there was no VoIP. There was no way to communicate with your team or your squad using your voice because the game just didn't support it. Obviously, if you were in like a party chat with your friends, you could talk to them. And there was text chat, but obviously you're not going to use that mid-game, right? And people complained about that when 2042 released. They were like, why is there not VoIP? How am I supposed to communicate with my squad? And to be fair, it's a valid criticism of the game because, I mean, VoIP is such an easy thing to implement into the game. And, I mean, it's just expected as a feature of a modern title like Battlefield. So it was like, the fact that they excluded it was pretty inexcusable in my opinion. So fair is fair. People complained about it. And eventually it was added to the game. And lo and behold, nobody uses it. I remember seeing a post on Reddit because after DICE had at some point made an announcement saying, all right, fine, we've heard your complaints. We're going to add VoIP to the game. And someone, before it was actually added, someone made a post saying, like, if I don't hear the entire lobby on the mic because of how much you guys have complained about the fact that the game doesn't have VoIP, it's like, you guys are just a bunch of hypocrites. And that's exactly what happened. They added voice chat to the game, and nobody uses it. Nobody plays Battlefield like a team. It's just exceptionally rare. So I just don't see that as a valid argument to be made for why they should use locked weapon classes. It's just, I don't agree with that. Just let people use what they want. It doesn't matter. Also, locking the weapons behind a class doesn't really solve anything. Like I said, people don't play the game like with a team in mind, right? But on top of that, I mean, it's a first-person shooter in big letters, all right? The thing you do more than anything else is shoot your gun. So people are going to choose what they use based on the gun that they get access to. So when you lock the weapons to a class, they're going to pick the class because of the gun that they have access to, not because of the abilities they have. And so that's just going to lead to more situations where you have a bunch of medics around you because the medics get the assault rifles and none of them are reviving because they don't care that they're a medic. They just wanted the assault rifle. So it doesn't really solve any problems. I have heard potential rumors that whether or not this is going to be part of a specific class or like a perk or something, I don't know. But I've heard that they're potentially considering allowing the player to have like two primary weapons instead of like a primary and a pistol or something, and I don't necessarily agree with that. I don't have a problem with every class having every weapon, but I don't like the idea of a certain class or a certain perk allowing a player to have two primaries. I think having, basic class structure where you have your primary weapon, your secondary weapon, and then your equipment, I think that is important, and I don't think that they should mess with that, but we'll see what happens. So that was just those two things that were recently announced that a lot of people have been bickering about because, heaven forbid, you deviate even slightly from the established formula of the franchise. Because I don't want anything new. I just want to play the same game that you've been giving me for the past 30 years with better graphics. I don't know. That's just the way I feel about that. But anyway, let's talk about the leaks. I don't know if I'm actually allowed to talk about this stuff, but I'm such a small channel that I doubt it would matter. And also, I'm not going to be using any like actual leaked footage of the playtests. So I think as long as I'm just talking about it, legally I'm in the clear. Hopefully, anyway. But anyway, let's get into it. What have I seen that gets me excited? Because like I said, I thought I was out of the game for good. I thought excitement, hype for a game was just out of the question. But clearly I'm getting excited. And so there has to be a reason. One of the reasons is the weapon customization system that I've seen leaked for the new Battlefield. I'll throw up a graphic on screen that's, it's not an actual screenshot from the game, but it'll just kind of give you an idea of what I'm talking about. But it looks like they're going with a pick 10 type of system, basically. If you're familiar with what pick 10 means, as far as I know, I think it was popularized by, or even maybe just straight up created by Call of Duty. Anyway, the idea is that you get a budget of points. In this case, it looks like you're going to get 100 points. And each individual attachment you pick will have a point cost associated with it. So better attachments will cost more points. So, you have a system wherein you can pick a small number of very valuable, potentially very lucrative attachments that affect the gun significantly. Or you can pick a wide variety of lesser attachments that, are worth fewer points, right? I like this system a lot. It's not only like 1 trillion times better than the bullshit plus system that we got with Battlefield 2042, which was just like the most disappointing weapon customization system I've ever seen in a game. But I would actually consider it to be a vast improvement over like genuinely robust weapon customization systems like the gunsmith from Call of Duty that we've seen in recent years. The gunsmith in Call of Duty is genuinely one of the best parts of the modern Call of Duties. It's super fun to mess around with the wide variety of attachments and attachment slots and making a bunch of cool looking builds or builds that actually function in the game, right? This system that they're potentially, I guess we're still super early on in development, so all of this is subject to change, but just based on what we've seen so far, the system that they're experimenting with for Battlefield 6 is actually even more interesting to me, and I think will allow them to do a lot more interesting things with the game and with the weapon customization. Because the main problem that I have with Call of Duty's Gunsmith, while it is very good, is that each of the attachments is, valued exactly the same. You have 5 options out of like 9 to 10 slots. And each attachment you choose takes up a slot. So each of them are equally valuable. But that leads to a situation where people are just going to pick the attachments that have the biggest benefits, right? So it kind of leads to more like meta builds where while there are like probably billions, maybe even like trillions of combinations that you could make because of how many options there are, people gravitate towards a small variety of builds just because they're the ones that make the most out of your 5 attachments. The benefit to this new system that Battlefield is working on is that because you can set a different value to different attachments depending on how actually valuable they are, how much they actually affect the weapon, I think it'll lead to much more variety in weapon builds because, like I said, it just gives you more control. It gives you, there's almost like a game within a game when it comes to building out, your gun, because, like I said, you can specialize the weapon by choosing a small number of very valuable attachments, or you can maybe try to make your gun into like a jack of all trades, where it doesn't specialize in any one area, but is just kind of boosted across the board by selecting a lot of very non-valuable attachments. So I am excited to see what they do with that. I feel like I don't know that this is a plan that they have at all. It probably is not. But this also gives them the ability to do other things with the gameplay. So, for instance, in the announcement that they talked about how the weapons would not be locked to particular classes, they talked about how you would have weapon proficiencies where, for instance, the recon class would specialize in sniper rifle. So while you can use any weapon with that class, if you do choose to use the sniper rifle, you get added benefits, right? In the example, they talked about how you'd be able to like hold your breath for longer or whatever. While that is cool, I think you could take it a step further by making it so that if you pick the proficient weapon class with a particular class, you get a larger budget for your weapon attachments. So if the standard budget is 100 points for your gun, if you match, a sniper rifle with the recon class, instead of 100 points, you get 150 or something, so that you can make the weapon more powerful by adding more attachments to it, something like that. I think that would be really, really cool. And just seeing that they're actually trying something different, they're trying something new with the weapon customization system, it's nice to see, and it does get me excited because, like I said, when it comes to first-person shooters, like customizing the gun is probably my favorite thing. If you've seen my videos, the best performing video on my channel is the one where I kit out my Mark 18 for airsoft. I just like guns. I think they're cool. They look cool. It's fun to mess around with them. So I love doing that in first-person shooters, and it looks like we might have a game that has a pretty robust weapon customization system, which I'm absolutely for. I love to see that. So I am very excited about that. I have a little list here, so I'm going to, just to kind of keep me focused. Another thing that this Battlefield 6 game might do better than Call of Duty, which Call of Duty's been, ever since Modern Warfare 2019 with the addition of the gunsmith and whatnot, the like level of detail of the guns and the weapon customization has been like off the charts, especially the Infinity Ward games. Infinity Ward just has some of the best artists in the game, honestly. And by in the game, I mean like in the industry. The modelers, the texturers, the animators, the people working at Infinity Ward are insane at their job. That being said, whether or not it's for licensing purposes or whatever, Call of Duty has this reluctance to model weapons and weapon accessories exactly how they exist in real life, which I'm not necessarily against 100%, but it does lead to situations in certain instances where things are a little less than desirable. So one instance, one example of that is in Call of Duty, the lasers. There's usually a lot of like laser attachments that you can use, but they never, first of all, they have a massive reluctance in Call of Duty to put the laser on the top rail, which is just like, that's the way they're mounted in real life. As long as there's top rail space to mount it, that's where you're going to put the laser. So it's always a little bit annoying when they put it off to the side. But on top of that, Call of Duty has this love of making the lasers super flat. They're super low profile, really low to the rail. In real life, lasers are pretty tall. I mean, this is even a pretty small laser, and even still, it sticks off of the rail like about an inch or so. Lasers are not that small, and so it's always a little annoying when in games, especially like Call of Duty, where the like fidelity of everything is super high, but then the detail of like how big the laser is and how like obvious it is on your gun is like very diminished. That's always been something that bugged me. In contrast to that, while Battlefield, I would say, does not have quite as robust of like a fidelity, I don't know that it's necessarily because the people that work on these games are just not as good or talented as the artists working at Infinity Ward. Granted, I would say that that probably has a little bit to do with it. Not necessarily trying to dog on the people that work at DICE and whatnot. I think the people that just work at Infinity Ward are some of the best. Infinity Ward's a big company because of how successful Call of Duty is, so they have the money to pay for the best of the best. And it shows, in my opinion. But I digress. Battlefield doesn't have the same level of fidelity as Call of Duty, especially in recent years. But what they do have is, you know, they just model stuff exactly as it is. I've seen screenshots from the leaks of Battlefield 6 and the alpha tests that are going on. And, I've seen lasers, like I saw a D-Ball D2 that was just straight up a D-Ball D2. Like, it probably doesn't have the branding of D-Ball on it. Or Steiner, I guess. I think Steiner is the company that makes those. So the branding is probably different, but who cares? The model is exactly the same. It's a full-size D2. I like that. I like that because the D2 is like one of, if not the biggest laser aiming modules on the market right now. So, it's just a good example. But yeah, that's nice to see. So it's exciting to potentially be playing a game where things like that are handled a bit more reasonably. I say that, again, as a person that doesn't really care if something is true to real life. I just want it to look cool. And I just personally find that when Call of Duty makes their lasers really flat and tiny, it just doesn't look as cool. I don't really care. People complain all the time about how Call of Duty doesn't call guns their actual name anymore. So like the MP5 is the Lockman sub and the AK is the Kastov 762 and stuff like that. Like, I don't give a fuck about that stuff. Who cares what they call it in the game? As long as it looks cool, that's all I care about. And it seems like DICE and just the Battlefield franchise in general is much more willing to make things that look closer to reality than Call of Duty is. And I would say that while maybe not always being the case, in certain instances that does lead to things looking a little cooler, and I'm totally for that. In that same regard, as of late, Call of Duty has been mounting all of their lasers on the right-hand rail. And I hate that. Like I said, you got to put it on the top. If there's rail on the top, just put it on the top. I get conflicting information about how Battlefield 6 is going to handle this. So I've seen images that show the lasers mounted on the top. Like I said, the screenshot I saw of the D-Ball D2 showed it being mounted to the top rail, which... excellent. Like I said, that's a huge laser, so to mount it on the top, because I think the reason Call of Duty mounts their lasers on the side rail nowadays is because they want as perfect of visibility through optics as possible. But not only do I not care about that, I'd rather the laser be mounted on top, but, potentially that actually gives Battlefield with their new weapon customization system even more flexibility and more like interesting cost benefit analysis, right? So imagine the situation, right? So you've got, your optics and you've got your lasers. If Battlefield decides to mount their lasers to the top rail and potentially impede with the visibility through the optic, right? The body of the laser could intrude into the optic window. You could have optic choices that include like a riser, for instance, that boost your optic up higher, allowing you to see over the laser more effectively. But those optics could cost more points with your 100-point budget. So you run into a situation where the player has to choose. Do they go for the optic that might have the clearer picture and, have to scale back some of their other attachments to make room for that budget, right? Or do they put up with the lower mounted optic that costs less points, but then have that intrusion in the window? I think that sort of thing is really interesting to think about. That's a cool cost benefit analysis situation that you just don't really get with Call of Duty and their gunsmith system, right? Now I say all that, and the problem is that I've seen other images and videos of Battlefield 6 and the alpha tests that are happening, and I have seen some side-mounted lasers on weapons that clearly have top-mounted rail space. Now, not every gun has the same amount of top rail space, and sometimes you do have to mount a laser on the side. That's just the way it is. But I have seen footage that shows lasers being mounted to the side of weapons that have plenty of top rail space, so we'll see. Maybe it isn't handled the same for every weapon. That would be a shame. I really would like to see them mount the lasers to the top rail on any weapon that could accommodate that. But who knows? Maybe they're planning on doing a system where the player gets to choose just arbitrarily where the laser's mounted. So they choose whether or not the gun has a laser, and if they choose to have a laser, they could choose where it's mounted. So you could put it on the side rail or the top rail. That does kind of diminish what I was just talking about, where certain optics could have risers and be worth more points, and that would be a whole cost-benefit thing. But it's a compromise I'd be willing to make because it basically makes everyone happy. I can mount my lasers to the top, and all the tryhards can mount their lasers to the side where it's out of the way. I don't care. Another thing about the weapon customization system that I'm seeing that I like is that it seems, I don't know, again, I've seen conflicting information about this, but it seems like they're going to allow you to have both a laser and a light, a weapon light, in different slots. So you can have them both simultaneously on the weapon. Call of Duty doesn't really do tactical lights, weapon lights, for some reason. I don't know why, because they're like just straight up ubiquitous on firearms. Like you don't have a rifle without a light. It doesn't happen. Every rifle is going to have a weapon light. That's just the way it is. So it is a little weird that they don't like lean into that very much, but the few number of lights that Call of Duty does have, they put them in the same category as the lasers, so you can't have both simultaneously. I've seen information that suggests that the weapon lights and the lasers in Battlefield 6 are going to be in their own different categories, so you can potentially have both at the same time, and I'm all for that, especially when you consider the track record of Battlefield as a franchise, where the flashlights are typically quite bright and actually serve a function as a flashlight, whereas in Call of Duty, the flashlights are always like literally 1 lumen, and it's like, what the fuck is this? This is garbage. I don't know why Call of Duty has such a knack for making the lights so dim. Like, why? What's the point? I don't get that. I can understand not wanting it to be, because people complained with like Battlefield 3 how the weapon light in that game was like another sun. It was so bright to like enemies. I feel like you can have it both ways. You can make it to where the light is not super bright to enemies, but is super bright to your first person view of the world, and it actually like illuminates the world. That's all I'm really asking for. So we'll see what direction Battlefield takes with that. I will say the one thing I'm a little bit tenuous about with the new Battlefield in terms of the weapon lights is that historically Battlefield has handled flashlights in a very just neutral way, and that's that the flashlight serves as a way to blind your enemies, and that's basically it. Which in this case would mean that there would probably only be one flashlight option, and you just either use it or you don't. Obviously, it would cost a certain number of points, so if you don't have enough points in your weapon budget to allow it, then you wouldn't choose it. But still, only having one flashlight option and having that flashlight only serve one purpose is a little less than ideal, I would say. I would like to see them get a bit more creative with the flashlight and its potential benefits to the player. So you could have your standard blinding flashlight that just, puts out a lens flare on the enemy screen when they look at you, and makes your player model a little bit more obscured, a little bit harder to track potentially, I'm perfectly fine with that being one of the options, but I think there's room for some other options. So, for instance, one thing I thought of in Battlefield 5 especially, I didn't see this as much as in Battlefield 2042 because the visuals of that game were not really complex enough to warrant this argument. But in Battlefield 5, people complained a lot about character model visibility. That seems like something that's just becoming more and more common in discussion with first-person shooters as of late. I don't know if that's because people are becoming more competitive, so that matters more to them, or if it's a matter of graphics getting so complex nowadays as graphics improve that, the more complex something is, the more it's going to blend in with its surroundings. When you have like a super simple game like Roblox, for instance, or something, it's very easy to distinguish a character model from the background because everything is so basic and simple. When you start to complexify, if that's a word, the graphics, things start to blend in more. And people complained a lot about Battlefield 5, about how the player models blended into the background and it was hard to differentiate things, So, as a way to alleviate that, a lot of games will often backlight or otherwise light the character models in a way that is unnatural, in a way that is not photo accurate, because they are brighter than their surroundings, at least to just a small degree, enough that it is noticeable and makes a difference in your ability to spot enemies. I think a compromise that could be made with this new Battlefield game is they could have a flashlight option for your gun that basically does this when you point it at an enemy. So with this particular weapon attachment, it wouldn't have as much of a blinding effect as the other one because you wouldn't want it to be doing both simultaneously. Although I guess you could, because with the point system, you could just make this flashlight significantly more expensive to put on the weapon. So that's another reason why the whole point system, attachment system, is really exciting to me. But either way, this second flashlight could operate in a way that when you point it at an enemy character model, they get illuminated more than the surroundings, if only to, like I said, a small degree. But it would be noticeable enough that it would make, identifying enemies more simple. So it gives players a way to alleviate that potential problem of character visibility being poor, and giving that capability to them so they can choose to fix that themselves. You don't have to fix that on the game as a whole by just illuminating all of the character models by default. You can give that power to the players, and if it's something that they decide is worthwhile, then they can spec into it, and if not, then they can save those points and put them in other areas. So, but yeah, we'll see. Like I said, Battlefield has not in the past gotten very creative with their flashlight attachments. Usually they're just for blinding the enemy. So I don't really see that happening, but I think that would be really cool to see, different things that the flashlights could be used for. And I think, like I said, with the point system, with their weapon customization, I think there's a lot of room to do really interesting things like that. And I'd like to see stuff like that. I'm getting a little outside the bounds of what's actual expectation, though, to be fair. It's super easy when you're getting excited about something to picture things that never were planned to begin with. So I'm getting kind of into that gray area. But regardless, the whole attachment system that they've shown, not really shown, but has been leaked, is very exciting to me. And that is one area specifically that's okay, it seems like they're actually trying something new. That's all I've been asking for. I just want something new. I've spent a long time talking about that, so let's quickly go through some of the other things that have gotten me a little bit excited about the current leaks that are coming out. The overall fidelity of the game looks pretty high, I would say, especially compared to 2042, which in a lot of ways seemed like a step back from Battlefield 5. Battlefield 5 was a phenomenal looking game, honestly. I mean, arguably it came out in the golden age of modern graphics, where lately there's an over-reliance on AI upscaling and AI frame generation and, just real-time optimization features in 3D engines as opposed to, traditional optimization. So you have games that look a bit muddier and run significantly worse nowadays than games that were coming out in the mid 2010s, 2015 to 2020. I feel like that was the golden age of graphics. I think Battlefield 5 came out in 2018, so it was right in there. Either way, Battlefield 5 looked great. Battlefield 2042 didn't look so great. I'd venture to guess that was because they made the jump to 128 players, so they had to scale back some of the effects and fidelity of the environment for that reason. As far as I know, I think they're just going back to 64 with Battlefield 6. I have no idea. I don't know if anyone knows what they're planning with that. But regardless, I mean, even in its super buggy and broken and unfinished state of the current pre-alpha playtests, the game actually looks pretty phenomenal. Especially the sound mix. That's another thing. The sound of the game, it sounds good. And I imagine a good number of the sound effects that they're using are just placeholder currently. I could be wrong. I don't know the pipeline of making a game. Maybe you make the sound effects really early on. I don't know. But it sounds good. It sounds really good. So that's always nice to see. I mean, yes, people make the argument that good graphics and good sound design and that sort of stuff doesn't make the game any more fun. And arguably that is true, but it's always nice to play a game that's good to look at and good to listen to, as opposed to one that isn't those things, So still, it gets me excited. It's nice to see. And in kind of that same vein, the destruction also looks pretty impressive from a visual perspective. I've seen, gameplay leaks of the destruction, and it's they're blowing off entire facades of buildings and stuff, and it's wow, the dust and the debris and everything. It looks really good. Now, granted, we're going to start talking about some of the things that have me a little bit worried about the leaks, all right? This isn't all good, all right? It's not all good. While we're on the topic of destruction, I will say this. it seems like a lot of the destruction that I've seen from the gameplay leaks is purely visual for the most part. There is some actual like gameplay destruction. What I mean by gameplay destruction is destruction that actually affects the way the map flows. It affects the cover that a person can use. It affects the routes a person can use, that sort of thing. A lot of the impressive visual destruction that I've seen in the game comes in the form of like blowing off the facades of buildings that are inaccessible. And then on top of that, it's kind of weird because you can shoot a rocket at a building. So you have like, let's say a 3 to 4 story tall building, right? You can shoot a rocket at it and the like top like 3 or 4 floors or whatever, they crumble and they get destroyed. But the base floor where the player is actually allowed to like enter and interact with is perfectly fine and you can't destroy it whatsoever. So it's this weird like dichotomy where it's like, why is the bottom so solid? It's like it looks good to blow off the top, but that's inaccessible anyway. So it doesn't affect the game at all. It's just fun to look at. And to be fair, that stuff is cool too. But I would love to see more meaningful destruction that actually affects the gameplay. And as of right now, I haven't seen too much of that actually affects the gameplay. Now, I think you can kind of blend the two. So in this example where you're blowing off the facades of the higher inaccessible floors of buildings, you could have the debris pile up on the ground, and then that becomes a way to create cover like in the street, I think that would be interesting. And that's not something that I've seen them do yet. I don't know. But I think that would be an interesting way to incorporate that more visually oriented destruction into something that actually does affect the gameplay. So yeah, I am a bit worried. There's a little fly. I am a little bit worried that the destruction is not going to be super impactful to the game and is more just a way to make the battlefield more immersive, right? Which isn't, again, it's not necessarily a bad thing, but I would much prefer the destruction to be gameplay oriented. Another thing I'm a little worried about, and I think they might already be tweaking this, I'm not 100% sure. So there was a gameplay leak quite a while ago that came out, and in that one, the time to kill and like the damage per shot of the guns was suboptimal, in my opinion. Everyone's going to have different opinions about what's optimal in terms of time to kill. I vastly prefer fast time to kill, high damage games over slower time to kill games. And the leaks seemed to display a game that was oriented more towards the middle of that spectrum, where it was like, in the realm of like a 5 to 7 shot kill at like a medium range, what I would consider like typical engagement range with several of the guns. And in that leak, I think they were using an SMG, so you can expect slightly lower damage. But even still, I mean, 5 to 7 shots that's just too many, in my opinion. The emotional satisfaction of having a gun, which is a powerful weapon, designed to destroy things. I just don't like when games like that require, that many number of shots to kill. That's just my preference. I know people will disagree, but I am a little worried that the game is going to feature a less than optimal time to kill, a little bit slower, a little bit, more shots required to kill. I'm just a little worried about that. Because like I said, I personally prefer faster time to kill, and I just find that that's just more emotionally satisfying because it actually bestows upon the player this idea of power, that the thing that they are holding is a powerful weapon. When you require like 7 shots to kill, even at like fairly close range, it's like, all right, well, I guess I'm using a Nerf gun. I don't know. It just kind of ruins it for me. So I'm hoping, like I said, though, those leaks were pretty early on. I've recently watched other leaks that seem like maybe they've sped it up a little bit. It's hard to tell exactly, but who knows? I'm sure they're still experimenting with exactly how fast they want the general time to kill of the game to be. Unfortunately, it seems like most of the competitive first-person shooter landscape of games, the industry, if you want to call it that, it seems like most of them are leaning more towards slower time to kill as of late. I think that's becoming more popular because it's better for people who are like really mechanically inclined. If you can track your target really well, then you can do better with a slow time to kill, because it just favors those people. I am not a pro gamer. I'm not that good. So I do have trouble tracking people, especially in games like Apex Legends that have like a super long time to kill and also have a very fast like movement speed, right? In that game, I don't even compete against, really good players. And that game is super frustrating to me for that reason. It's just so unsatisfying to like shoot someone with like, in that game, it takes like 20 shots to kill. It's insane. So I don't know. We'll see. Hopefully they tone it down, make the time to kill a little faster. That's what I'm hoping. At the very least, it would be cool if there was like some kind of hardcore mode, although I will say this very quickly, I do need to get moving, but I know this is going to sound super picky, and admittedly it is, but in a lot of games, the like normal mode time to kill is too slow, and the hardcore time to kill is too fast. I know. I'm Goldilocks over here, but it's true. It's true. In a lot of, like Call of Duty, for instance, the normal mode has a time to kill of generally around like 200 to like 300 milliseconds. And then in the hardcore modes of those games, most of the guns are a one-shot kill at like all ranges. It's like, that's too fast. And the other one is too slow. I think the ideal time to kill is like somewhere around like 100 to 200 milliseconds. I know that would be like way too fast to a lot of people. And I get that like the average reaction time is 250 milliseconds. So like, oh, Connor, you can't react to that. And it's like, that's kind of the point. There's nothing more unsatisfying to me than unloading on a person, and hitting them with like 3 to 4 shots, but they don't die because it takes more than that. And then they are able to react and like run behind cover. I get that that's appealing to like streamers and pro players because it allows them to act and play more recklessly and rely more on their mechanical skill rather than their strategy. But as a player that doesn't have mechanical skill and relies more on my strategy, I just prefer when I am able to catch people off guard, and actually the game actually, supports and rewards thinking ahead and, playing more like tactically, if you will. This is a minor nitpick, but the rocket speed is really slow. In the recent leaks that I watched, the rockets move at like 1 mile an hour. They're really slow. That's an easy fix. I don't know. My guess would be that the reason they're doing that is because they want it to be harder to hit vehicles, especially at like a distance. Just make the rockets regular speed. Just make them faster. That's, I don't, there's nothing else to say there. Just make them faster. It's just dumb when they're really slow and they're just like, it's like someone throwing a punch, but it's like a rocket just flying through the air. Anyway, game mode variety. Now, to be fair, I haven't heard anything about this specifically, so I don't know that this is necessarily the case, but I'm going out on a limb here and assuming that, we're going to see Conquest, Breakthrough, Rush, Team Deathmatch, the typical Battlefield game modes. I've talked about this in previous videos. I want to play a new game mode. Please, for the love of God, DICE, EA, whoever has control over this decision, please implement a new game mode. I want to play something entirely new. I don't want to play Conquest for the 700 millionth time. I don't want to play Breakthrough. I don't want to play Rush. I mean, I will gladly play those modes, but give me something new to sink my teeth into. That's all I'm asking. I don't care if it's like a big mode like a battle royale or more of like a smaller mode like Conquest and Breakthrough where it's just another multiplayer mode. I don't care. Just give me something new. I don't want to play the same old modes that we've been playing for 15, 20 years. Just give me something new, please. Again, I haven't heard anything about this. I don't know if anyone knows at this point what they're planning to do. The last two games, Battlefield 5 and 2042, both featured a separate mode. So Battlefield 5 had the Firestorm mode, which was their battle royale. And then 2042 had Hazard Zone, which was their attempt at an extraction royale. Both of those modes failed immensely, which would lead me to believe that maybe they're just not even going to bother with this game to try something new like that. But we'll see. If anyone at DICE is listening or watching this video, which, there's a 0% chance that that's going to happen, but I'll state my case here in a moment anyway. Those modes failed, not because they were necessarily bad, although Hazard Zone was pretty bad. They failed because the games in general failed. Battlefield 5 was a PR nightmare. They told people not to buy it. People didn't buy it. And the game launched in a bad state, so the player base dropped off quickly. 2042 was released completely unfinished, and yeah, the player base dropped off quickly. So of course those separate modes are going to fail because the games as a whole don't have the player base to support them. Now again, like I said, Hazard Zone was their attempt at, hopping on the extraction shooter bandwagon, right? But it was the laziest attempt to do so that I've ever seen. A year after 2042 came out, Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2, Modern Warfare 2022, I guess a lot of people call it, implemented their DMZ mode, which proved to be super successful. A lot of people really loved that mode, myself included. That was one of the most fun modes because it was new. Wow, go figure. It was something I hadn't played before. Now, to be fair, the idea in and of itself was not intrinsically new. Again, DMZ was just Call of Duty's attempt at hopping on the extraction shooter bandwagon. But I had never played an extraction shooter. I hadn't played Escape from Tarkov. I hadn't played Hunt Showdown. So that was my first experience with that type of game, and it was immensely fun because it was so novel. I would love for Battlefield to actually try to do something new. Again, like I said, it doesn't have to be, balls to the walls, big mode like DMZ or Warzone or something, If you're not comfortable allocating the necessary resources to make a game mode like that work, I get it, right? You are a smaller studio than, Activision, Infinity Ward, and those other studios. But please, for the love of God, just please make something new. Give us some new game mode. That's all I'm asking. I just really, if the game comes out and it's just Conquest, Breakthrough, Rush, Team Deathmatch, I'm going to be very disappointed. And that's pretty much everything I have listed on my sheet there. Like I said, I didn't think I would be in this position, especially with the Battlefield franchise in particular. 2042 was a massive letdown. I was so hyped for that game. And it came out, and like I said, it wasn't even necessarily that the game was bad. It was just completely unfinished. And that was super disappointing. There's also something to be said about the fact that 2042 as a game was very distracted. They had the base multiplayer modes, they had Hazard Zone, and then they also had the Portal mode, which had a bunch of legacy content. So the game was very distracted in its portrayal. It actually had quite a bit of content in it at launch, but because it was divided in between those separate modes, each individual mode didn't have that much content. The base game only had like 15 guns or something in it. I don't remember. It was like 15 to 20 guns or something like that. A very small assortment of weapons, with some of the categories only having like 2 different options. In a game, where a big part of it is the progression, and again, it's a first-person shooter, so using the gun is a big part of it. Having a small variety of guns does kind of ruin it, especially for me, where that's like kind of my main interest with these types of games. But, we'll see what happens. We'll see. A lot of people talk shit about 2042 because of the specialists. I never had a problem with the specialists. Now, if you want to say that the specialists were cringy as hell, I will be right there with you. They were cringy as hell. It just didn't work. Clearly, they were going for like an Apex Legends style of game where the characters are all quirky and cool and calm and collected, and they think it's just one big game because to the player it is a game. But it just doesn't work. Apex Legends works like that because the entire game is portrayed to the player in a cartoonish way. Battlefield is presented to the player with this gritty, photorealistic art style. But then the characters are all like quippy and quirky, and it's like, what the fuck is going on? So I 100% agree that was a bad choice. But as far as the specialists themselves in terms of gameplay, I had no issue with it. I think people complaining about that were just grasping at straws, really. They were just upset that Battlefield had taken such a change, a different direction. And again, there's something to be said about the difference between imitation and innovation. A franchise or a game changing all of a sudden, that isn't necessarily always going to be innovation. Innovation is what I want to see in games. I want to see new stuff. I just want new experiences, new gameplay, new ideas. That's all I want. When Battlefield 2042 came out, it had a lot of new things for the franchise, but they weren't new ideas. It was mostly just an amalgamation of every other popular game at the time being put into one game under the name of Battlefield. That is imitation, not innovation. So I would argue that that's why it failed. Unfortunately, the problem is that when people complain about it, I think it's hard for the developers and these companies to differentiate between people complaining about imitation versus innovation. And I really, really hope that with this next title, because of how much 2042 failed and how much criticism it received, I really hope that DICE and any other people that are working on this next iteration of the game understand that innovation is not bad, but imitation is bad. You shouldn't just copy what's been done and is popular in other popular games, right? But do not be afraid to mix up the formula and try something new. Please, for the love of God, try something new. If I wanted to play a game that was exactly like Battlefield 3, I can just go play Battlefield 3. I don't get people, people are so reluctant to allow the franchise to evolve to become something more than it ever was. And I get it, right? You think back and you're nostalgic for the past. You're nostalgic for the fun that you had when playing Battlefield 3 and Battlefield 4 and whatnot, I get it. I understand that. But I think people fail to realize that the reason that they had so much fun playing those games back then was because those games innovated. They tried something new at the time. If you want to have that same experience, you shouldn't be asking for DICE to make Battlefield 3 again. You should be asking them to innovate and change the franchise into something entirely new that's never been seen before. That's how you actually have an experience like the one you had before. It's a bit counterintuitive because you think, I had so much fun with Battlefield 3. If they just release Battlefield 3 again, I'll have a ton of fun, right? It doesn't really work that way because you've already played Battlefield 3. That experience will no longer be novel. Novelty is everything when it comes to the joy of an experience. And I just really hope that DICE and the rest of the developers working on this game understand that and that they're willing to try something new, actually genuinely new, not just copy other popular formulas, actually try something new. That's what I want to see. And only time will tell what ends up happening, but that's my hope for this game. Like I said, the leaks do have me a bit excited, and I didn't expect that. But it's kind of fun to be excited. Being cynical is, I guess you don't get your hopes up and then look like a fool. But honestly, I think it's better to get excited and be disappointed because it's just more fun. Anyway, thanks for watching, and I'll catch you later.